Hi, my name is Sean Smith, and welcome to another Voice Advisor resource overview. We're going to focus today on role playing and try to facilitate that implementation of role playing. And if you're unfamiliar with Voice Advisor, our Voice Advisor is basically a resource we've created to help understand educators, parents, other individuals working with students with social skill challenges, understand practices or interventions that can facilitate the practice and generalization of a learned social skill. And as you know, in this instance, we're going to focus in on role playing, but as you know, the Voice Advisor goes along with the VOISS virtual reality application, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But role playing itself, what is it? Role playing is what it sounds like. It basically gives an opportunity for the individual to practice what they've learned, in this instance, in those virtual reality, those 10 different domain areas of social skills and the various skill areas that we practice in those scenarios. And as we know, the VOISS application is focused on the students. This advisor, this video, is focused on us, the educator. So now, what is it? It's a framework. It facilitates the desired practice of the desired behavior, and it helps to generalize that through very specific and purposeful role playing. Now, with it, it's going to address opportunities, like I said, very purposeful, but it's going to be addressing those opportunities with practice. It's going to simulate, and it's going to also offer some play acting in a way for the individual that we want to take and generalize into the classroom, into the expected area. Now, when we think of practice, and I've been using practice in a variety of different ways, but let's think about we're trying to practice so we develop an ability, right? We develop the ability to use, etc. And those, that 10,000 hour rule and the ability to actually become proficient, we need to practice for 10,000 hours. We're not going to do that. We're not going to have that opportunity. But through role playing, we can give some time in a very concerted effort, and for the individual, a very controlled effort, where they take what is an unnatural behavior, we're trying to take that natural behavior, and act out what is appropriate based on, of course, that social area that we're trying to teach and facilitate. So role playing allows us as educators and the individuals involved to provide feedback on that performance, right? And the individual themselves can reflect on that with the right types of questions on our part. We can offer suggested improvements. We can break down the steps or ideas that we're trying to, bring into or remind them of in terms of the understanding, and then I guess rinse and repeat, right? In terms of going back and forth, back and forth. Now, there's 7 key components to implementation. Now, the implementation guide that you have as a downloadable job aid guide will reiterate this, but let's at least go over it very basically. All right, so what's number 1? Well, number 1 on our implementation guide is we identify the setting. Now, this, of course, is simple. Where do we want the learner to, basically demonstrate that targeted behavior? Number 2, we basically conduct an inventory. And in this instance, we go into the environment and observe to identify what's necessary for those social skills to be able to be applied and implemented and generalized into this environment. Now, many instances we may know about this, but an inventory can give us those specifics. Number 3, we create that script. We think about the dialogue. We think about what needs to take place in terms of that interaction, the conversation, what the individual is going to need to be able to understand in terms of that role playing. Number 4, we basically role play in that environment. We need to think about that. Now, we may need to simulate it. For example, we may have instances where the students engaged are students that we ask to come in. Maybe it's during recess or during a quiet time where not all students are there. We need to incorporate the people that will resemble the people targeted for that setting. Again, similar age, things of that nature for that practice. Because remember, some of the students that we work with may not want to practice and role play with their peers. We need a model. And yes, whenever I think of model, I think of Cindy Crawford. And for those that saw the video modeling, you're like, Sean, Cindy Crawford again? And if you haven't, I like Cindy Crawford. But we model what we want the individual, that targeted learned behavior we want them to observe. We may do that with a peer. We may do that with an assistant, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we then bring in the learner. And so here, the student practices their parts. We may have visual cues on the written script to facilitate how they're supposed to react, how they're supposed to look in terms of their response. And of course, we want to fade out words over time with the script. So we want to fade that out to have it more of their own behavior. Therefore, it becomes very natural. Now, by the way, and we'll have this in the implementation guide, there's a variety of different ways to do it, and here's one. And again, I'll break that down a little bit further in the guide. Now, in terms of the implementation, we want to make sure that, hey, we have the script, great, and then we demonstrate the learned skill in the authentic setting, great. So to do it, as I mentioned before, we can bring in visuals. We can facilitate in terms of training. We can do this over time. We can do this in terms of the authentic setting, and the list of things goes on. Really, really critical. So very briefly, with the implementation guide that you can download, that's a brief overview of role-playing as a tool, as a resource, as an intervention to use to allow for that practice and generalization of the social skill domain or the specific skill learned in the VOISS virtual reality application. I hope this has been helpful, and come on back for more. We have a number of different resources for practices and interventions to help in practice and generalize that learned social skill from the VOISS virtual reality application. Hope this has been helpful.